The mysterious gift. John had always been a man of science. He spent most of his life working in the cold silence of space, studying stars, planets, and galaxies. His job on the remote space station was quiet, with days that stretched into weeks without much excitement. But that all changed one morning when something strange appeared on his communication screen. A single message blinked on the screen. "Come to the edge of the galaxy. A gift awaits you." The message was short, simple, and strangely unsettling. No sender was listed, and there were no other details. John stared at the screen for a long time, unsure of what to think. He had received many messages in his years as a scientist, but none like this. At first, he thought it might be a prank. Space was full of strange signals, but this one felt different. His curiosity got the better of him. He checked the coordinates. They were located far outside any known human colonies. It was deep in uncharted space, where few ships ever traveled. The more he thought about it, the more he felt the need to explore. John wasn't the type to back down from a challenge. After a moment's hesitation, he decided to go. If it was a trap, he would deal with it, but something about the message tugged at him. It felt important. He packed his things and boarded his ship, the Explorer. The ship was old but reliable. It had taken him on countless missions, and now it was going to take him into the unknown. The space station was a quiet, lonely place, and the vastness of space was something he had always been used to. But this felt different. As the ship powered up and left the station behind, John couldn't shake the feeling that he was stepping into something much larger than he understood. The journey was long and silent. John spent most of the time studying the data from his ship's sensors. He had no idea what to expect when he arrived. The coordinates led him to an uncharted sector, far from any known star systems. There was nothing here, just empty space. As the days passed, John began to feel a strange unease. The quiet of space, usually so comforting to him, now felt oppressive. He tried to keep himself busy by reading and checking the ship's systems, but his mind kept drifting back to the message. Who had sent it? And why? One evening, as he was scanning through some star maps, something unusual appeared on his screen. A strange energy signal, unlike anything he had seen before, was coming from a nearby sector. It wasn't like any known technology. It was strong, powerful even, and it seemed to pulse with a life of its own. John's heart skipped a beat. The signal was coming from the very place the message had led him to. He adjusted his course, and within hours, the ship arrived at the coordinates. The view outside the ship was unlike anything John had ever seen. A massive planet loomed before him, larger than any planet he had seen before. It was covered in swirling clouds, with deep reds and oranges filling the sky. The planet's surface appeared to be covered in ancient ruins, strange structures that stretched high into the atmosphere. The planet felt alive, as though it had been waiting for something or someone. John slowed the ship's approach, taking in the breathtaking sight. He landed on the planet's surface, the ground shaking slightly as the ship's landing gears touched down. His pulse raced, and his mind was filled with questions. What was this place? And why had he been brought here? He stepped out of the ship, the cold air hitting him like a wall. The atmosphere of the planet felt strange, as though the very air was different from Earth. He checked his equipment, ensuring his suit was sealed and functioning properly. As he looked around, John felt an eerie sensation that he wasn't alone. There was a presence here, something watching him. He walked cautiously toward the ruins in the distance, the ground beneath his boots crunching with each step. The structures appeared to be made of a material that didn't look like anything human-made. It was smooth, almost metallic, yet it shimmered in the light like glass. John's mind raced as he tried to make sense of it. As he reached the center of the ruins, he saw something that stopped him in his tracks. In the middle of a massive open space, a large object sat, almost glowing in the dim light. It was a box, strange, angular, and made of the same shimmering material as the ruins around it. John felt a pull toward it, as if the box was calling to him. His instincts told him to approach, but a small part of him hesitated. It was too perfect, too out of place in this ancient, forgotten world. But his curiosity overcame his doubt, and he stepped forward. The moment he touched the box, a strange sensation filled the air. It was like a pulse, a vibration that seemed to come from deep within the ground itself. John took a deep breath, steadying himself, and then slowly opened the box. Inside, he found something that would change everything. The box contained a figure, an alien girl, small and fragile-looking, with glowing skin that seemed to pulse softly in the dim light. She was lying motionless, as though asleep, her long hair flowing around her like liquid silver. John's breath caught in his throat. This wasn't just some artifact. This was a living being. He stepped back, his mind racing. Why had the message led him here? What was he supposed to do with her? And who had sent this strange gift? Before he could process what he had found, a voice rang out in his mind, deep and commanding. "She is a token of my gratitude. Take care of her, for she is far more than she appears." The voice faded as quickly as it had come, leaving John alone with the girl. His heart raced. What had just happened? Who was this alien baron, and why had he given John this gift? The silence around him deepened, and John felt more alone than ever. The girl in the box wasn't just a mystery. She was the key to something much bigger. John closed the box slowly, the weight of the moment pressing on him. He wasn't sure what to do next, but one thing was clear. His life had just changed forever. The real adventure was only just beginning. Arrival at the unknown. John stood there, staring down at the small, fragile-looking alien girl in the box, his heart pounding in his chest. Her glowing skin was like nothing he had ever seen, and her long silver hair shimmered softly in the dim light. The strange voice that had spoken to him echoed in his mind, leaving him with more questions than answers. "She is a token of my gratitude. Take care of her, for she is far more than she appears." The silence around him felt heavy, almost suffocating. He had always prided himself on his scientific mind, his ability to think logically and analytically. But nothing about this situation made sense. Who was this alien baron? Why had he sent the girl? And what was he supposed to do with her now? John gently lifted the box, feeling the weight of it in his hands. The girl remained motionless, her eyes closed as though she were simply asleep. Despite her delicate appearance, something about her presence felt important. His instincts told him that this was no ordinary gift. But why had the Baron sent her to him? What was her true purpose? He carefully carried the box back to his ship, the Explorer, which stood in the distance, its silhouette casting a long shadow against the alien landscape. The planet seemed ancient, as though it had witnessed countless years of history, and yet it was still full of mysteries waiting to be uncovered. John felt like an intruder in this forgotten world, but his curiosity pushed him forward. Once back inside the ship, John set the box down on the central table. The ship's systems hummed quietly, filling the air with a comforting mechanical sound. He quickly checked the girl's vitals on the ship's medical scanner. She was alive, barely, but stable. There was no sign of injury or harm. John let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. At least she wasn't in immediate danger. But what now? As he sat down in the ship's cockpit, staring at the alien girl, a thought began to form in his mind. The message had been clear. Come to the edge of the galaxy. A gift awaits you. But what did the gift mean? Was it just the girl, or was there something more to this? Was she the key to something greater than he could understand? A soft beep from the ship's communication system interrupted his thoughts. It was a signal, a strange frequency that John had never encountered before. His fingers hesitated over the controls. The signal wasn't from any known source. It wasn't human, and it wasn't from any of the alien races he had studied. It was different, almost like it was meant specifically for him. John pressed the button to receive the transmission, and immediately, a hologram flickered to life in front of him. The image of an alien figure appeared, a towering, imposing figure with sharp, angular features and a deep blue aura that seemed to pulse with power. It was the Baron. John's breath caught in his throat. The alien Baron was real. The figure spoke in a language John didn't understand, but somehow, the words seemed to resonate in his mind. You have found her. Good. She will need you, human. You are more important to the galaxy than you know. Protect her, and the galaxy will stand a chance. Fail her, and everything will fall. The hologram flickered and disappeared, leaving John in stunned silence. He was left alone with more questions than answers. What did the Baron mean by the galaxy will stand a chance? And why was he so important in all of this? He turned back to look at the girl, who remained motionless in the box. Despite her calm appearance, John felt an unsettling sense of urgency. Whatever the Baron meant, it was clear that this girl was at the center of something far bigger than he had ever imagined. She wasn't just a gift. She was the key. Suddenly, the ground beneath the ship trembled, shaking violently as though the planet itself was reacting to the presence of the girl. John's heart raced as he checked the ship's systems. Everything was normal, but the tremors seemed to grow stronger. It was as though something was waking up beneath the surface of the planet, something ancient, powerful, and dangerous. John's eyes darted to the girl. Was she causing this? Was she somehow connected to whatever force was stirring below? He didn't have answers, but one thing was certain: he couldn't stay here much longer. He quickly powered up the Explorer, preparing to take off. But before he could make a move, the ship's communication system beeped again. This time, it wasn't the alien Baron's voice, but something else. A warning. Warning. Alien forces detected. Unknown ships approaching. Prepare for immediate departure. John's blood ran cold. Alien ships were coming, and they were coming fast. He checked the external scanners, and sure enough, a fleet of strange ships was headed straight toward the planet. They were not human, and they were not friendly. John didn't know who they were or why they were coming, but he had no choice. The girl was in danger. With no time to waste, John hit the thrusters and launched the Explorer into the air. The planet's surface began to crack, massive chasms opening wide, as if something below was trying to break free. He could feel the ship shaking as it soared higher into the atmosphere. In the distance, he could see the alien ships, their dark shapes looming ominously against the backdrop of the swirling clouds. John didn't know who the alien forces were or what they wanted with the girl, but he knew one thing for sure. The galaxy was about to change, and he was in the middle of it all. The Explorer sped toward space, but as he glanced back at the planet below, he felt a growing sense of dread. The girl in the box wasn't just a gift. She was the center of a mystery that could tear the galaxy apart. And John had no idea what role he would play in the coming storm. The alien girl. The Explorer shot through the void of space, leaving the planet far behind. John's fingers tightened on the controls as he tried to steady the ship. The tremors from the planet had shaken him to his core, and the sight of the approaching alien fleet only added to his growing unease. He couldn't shake the feeling that everything had changed in an instant. His quiet life as a scientist was over. He was no longer just a man of knowledge. He was a man caught in the middle of something far bigger than himself. As the ship entered the relative safety of deep space, John turned his attention to the box. The alien girl inside it still hadn't moved, her glowing skin softly pulsing like the slow rhythm of a heartbeat. He could see the faint rise and fall of her chest as she breathed, but beyond that, there was nothing. No signs of distress, no signs of awakening. She was simply there. John leaned closer, studying her features. Her skin was like nothing he had ever seen, smooth and translucent, with veins of light pulsing under the surface, a soft glow that shifted with each breath she took. Her hair was long and silvery, almost liquid in the way it seemed to flow around her. The more he looked at her, the more he felt a strange sense of connection, as though he were looking at someone who belonged to an entirely different world. He couldn't help but wonder what she was, where she came from, and what she was meant to do. He reached out and gently touched the box, his hand trembling slightly. The moment his fingers brushed against the surface, a surge of energy ran through him. It wasn't painful, but it was powerful, almost as if the box itself was alive. He quickly withdrew his hand, his heart racing. Was this girl somehow connected to the strange energy pulse he had felt when he first opened the box on the planet? Was she the source of it? Suddenly, the girl stirred. Her eyes, which had been closed, fluttered open. They were a striking shade of violet, deep and intense, glowing softly in the dim light of the ship. She blinked a few times, her gaze unfocused as though she were trying to adjust to her surroundings. For a moment, there was nothing but silence, the quiet hum of the ship filling the space between them. John held his breath, unsure of what to do. He had no experience with alien life, let alone with something as mysterious as this girl. Was she hostile? Was she a prisoner? Or was she something else entirely? The girl's head slowly turned toward him, her eyes locking onto his with an intensity that sent a shiver down his spine. It was as though she was studying him, trying to understand who, or what, he was. Then, in a voice that was barely a whisper, she spoke. "You are different." John blinked in surprise, his mind racing. She could speak, and she understood him. His mouth went dry as he tried to respond, but the words caught in his throat. What was he supposed to say? He had no idea what was happening. His entire life had been about facts and logic, about things that could be measured and understood. But this was beyond anything he had ever imagined. "Who are you?" he finally managed to ask, his voice shaky but steady. "Where do you come from?" The girl's eyes softened, and she sat up slowly, her movements graceful and fluid. There was a quiet strength to her, something that felt ancient and powerful. She looked at him for a moment before speaking again, her voice still a soft whisper, but now carrying an air of quiet authority. "I am called Ilara," she said, her voice like music, smooth and soothing. "I am the last of my kind." John's heart skipped a beat. The last of her kind. What did that mean? He was filled with a million questions, but one stood out above the rest. "What happened to your people?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Ilara's eyes grew distant, and for a moment, John thought she wasn't going to answer. But then she spoke again, her voice low and filled with sadness. "They were destroyed," she said softly, "by the ones who now seek me." John's mind raced. The ones who sought her. Was that what the alien fleet was after? But why? And what was so important about this girl? He had no answers, only more questions, and yet he couldn't shake the feeling that Ilara held the key to everything. There was something about her that was far more than it seemed. Her presence alone was enough to unsettle him, but it also felt like a promise, like she was the answer to something he didn't yet understand. "What are you?" he asked, his voice almost breaking. "What do they want with you?" Ilara looked at him, her violet eyes full of sorrow and understanding. She seemed to hesitate, as if unsure how much to reveal. Then she spoke again, her words heavy with the weight of an ancient secret. "I am the last of the ancients," she said. "The ones who created the galaxy. The ones who held the power to shake the stars." John's mind reeled. The ancients created the galaxy. This was no ordinary alien girl. She was something much older, much more powerful than he could have ever imagined. But why had she been hidden away? Why was she the last of her kind? Before he could ask more, the ship's sensors beeped urgently. His eyes snapped to the screen, and his blood ran cold. The alien fleet was closing in fast. There was no more time for questions. He had to act. "Ilara," he said, his voice urgent. "We need to get out of here. They're coming for you." Ilara nodded slowly, her expression turning serious. "I know. They will come for me, and they will not stop until they have me. But you can help me. You are the key, human. You have a role to play in what is coming." John felt a chill run down his spine. What role? What was coming? Before he could ask, the ship shook violently, throwing him forward in his seat. The alien fleet had arrived, and the battle for Ilara's future was about to begin. The alien baron's message. The explorer jolted violently, the shock of the impact sending John's body forward into the console. His hands gripped the controls tightly as alarms blared throughout the ship. His heart raced, and his mind was filled with panic. The alien fleet had arrived. They were already attacking. John quickly checked the external sensors. 4 massive ships surrounded them, each one dark and menacing, their sleek hulls reflecting the cold light of the distant stars. They were outnumbered. The ships were armed with technology far more advanced than anything humanity had. But it wasn't the weapons that made John's blood run cold. It was what he could sense about them. They weren't just here to capture Ilara. They were here to destroy everything that stood in their way. Ilara sat still, her eyes closed, her expression unreadable. She seemed unfazed by the chaos around her. John had no idea how she could remain so calm. Was she truly unaware of the danger, or was she hiding something even deeper than her mysterious powers? "Ilara," he said urgently, turning to face her. "We need to get out of here. I don't know how much longer we can hold them off." Her violet eyes opened slowly, and for the first time, John saw something other than sadness in her gaze. Determination. "It's too late to run," she said quietly, her voice calm despite the panic in the air. "They've already found us. But you're not the one they are after." John's brow furrowed in confusion. What did she mean? The alien fleet was clearly targeting them. Everything about this situation screamed danger, yet Ilara spoke as though she had seen it all before. "They want me," she continued, her voice soft but steady. "They always have. But there is something you need to understand, John. I'm not just a girl. I am the key to their power and to your survival." Before John could respond, a new signal flashed on the ship's communication system, the frequency unlike anything he had encountered before. The moment he activated it, the same voice from earlier, the voice of the alien baron, boomed inside his mind. "Human." The voice rumbled, its tone deep and filled with authority. "You have found her, and for that, you have done well. But the real challenge is yet to come." John froze, his hands trembling as he tried to make sense of what was happening. The voice wasn't coming from the ship's speakers. It was in his head, a mental connection far beyond anything he had experienced before. His heart pounded in his chest, and he glanced at Ilara. She seemed calm, as though this was nothing new. The voice continued, "You cannot escape what is coming. You may try to flee, but it will be in vain. The galaxy is changing, and you and she are at the center of it. Protect her, for she is the only one who can stop what is to come." John's mind raced as the words sank in. What did the Baron mean by "stop what is to come"? What kind of power did Ilara hold that could affect the fate of the galaxy? He looked at her, but she remained silent, her face unreadable. The weight of the Baron's words pressed heavily on him. "The others will come," the voice of the Baron warned, "and when they do, you must be ready. She will guide you, but only if you trust her. Time is running out." The message ended abruptly, leaving John with more questions than ever before. What did the Baron mean by trust her? How could he trust someone he barely knew? Someone who seemed to carry the weight of the galaxy on her shoulders? Was he supposed to believe that this girl, who had just woken up in a box, could truly change the course of history? The ship shook again, but this time it wasn't from the impact of enemy fire. This was something else, a deep rumble that seemed to come from the very core of the planet they had left behind. John turned to the ship's sensors, his heart sinking as the data began to flood in. The planet they had just escaped from was starting to collapse. Massive fissures were appearing on the surface, sending enormous shockwaves through space. It wasn't just the planet's surface cracking. It was as if something inside was beginning to wake up. A powerful energy source, dormant for eons, was stirring, and the alien fleet was clearly aware of it. They weren't just after Ilara. They were after whatever power lay within the planet's depths. "Ilara," John said, his voice filled with urgency. "What's happening? What did they do to the planet? Why are they so desperate to find you?" She turned to him, her expression filled with quiet sorrow. "The planet was the birthplace of my people," she explained softly. "It's a place of great power, one that the Barons and their kind have sought for generations. They destroyed my civilization, trying to harness its power. But what they don't understand is that the power is not in the planet. It's in me." John's breath caught in his throat. She was the power. Ilara wasn't just a girl. She was the last of her kind, the last link to an ancient civilization that could reshape the universe. If the alien forces had destroyed her people, they must have known the threat she posed. The Barons were clearly desperate to control her, to use her abilities for their own purposes. Before he could process everything she had just revealed, the ship's sensors pinged again. The alien fleet was closing in fast. They were preparing to board the Explorer, their ships surrounding them in a perfect blockade. "Ilara," John said, panic creeping into his voice. "What do we do now? How can we survive this?" Ilara's eyes met his, and for the first time, she seemed to acknowledge the depth of their situation. She stood, moving with graceful determination. "You must trust me, John," she said firmly. "This is the moment you were chosen for." John didn't know what that meant, but as the alien ships drew closer, he realized he had no choice. He had to trust her. She was the only chance they had. A moment of quiet filled the ship. Then, Ilara's body began to glow, the energy from her form radiating outward in a brilliant wave. The room filled with a blinding light, and John shielded his eyes. In that moment, John realized that whatever happened next, their lives, and the fate of the galaxy, were now in Ilara's hands. Secrets unveiled. The light surrounding Ilara was blinding, pulsing with a raw, almost primordial energy. John had to squint to make sense of the scene in front of him. The ship's systems flickered and crackled, fighting to stay online as the intense energy disrupted the controls. The air around them hummed, vibrating with the same strange power that emanated from Ilara's body. Her eyes were closed now, her face serene, as if she were in some deep trance, yet she was fully aware of what was happening. The light enveloped the entire ship, streaming through the walls, filling every corner and bending the space around them. For a brief moment, John felt weightless, like they had transcended time and space itself. The stars outside seemed to warp and twist, as if the very fabric of the universe was being reshaped. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the light died down and the ship stabilized. The tremors in the hull ceased. John blinked, his mind still struggling to process what had just occurred. His ship, once shaking with the force of incoming alien vessels, was now in perfect stillness. Outside, the alien fleet had stopped advancing. In fact, it seemed as if they were no longer approaching at all. They hovered in place, motionless, as though waiting for something. "Ilara," John's voice broke the silence. His heart was racing, and his mind was in overdrive. What had just happened? What was she doing to them? Ilara's eyes opened, glowing faintly with the same violet light that seemed to radiate from her skin. She didn't speak at first, but there was a calmness about her, as though she were in complete control of the situation. She looked at him, her gaze intense yet not cold, more knowing, as though she could see right through him. "They are afraid," Ilara said softly, her voice steady and clear. "They know what I can do, what I must do." John's pulse quickened. "What do you mean? What are you?" She stood slowly, her presence now filling the small cockpit. "I am not just the last of my kind, John. I am the last of the ancients. My people were the architects of the universe, the ones who molded the stars and planets, and who guarded the balance of power across the galaxy." John's breath caught in his throat. The ancients. He had read about them in dusty old archives. ancient texts that spoke of a long-forgotten race of godlike beings, powerful enough to control the fabric of reality itself. But those were just stories, legends, myths. He had never imagined they were real, let alone that one of them was standing in front of him. "But why are you here?" John asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why didn't they destroy you with the rest of your people?" Ilara's eyes softened, a flicker of sorrow passing through them. "I was hidden. The ancients saw the coming darkness and knew that the power they had once wielded was too great for any one being to possess. So they sealed it away within me and placed me in stasis. I was meant to awaken when the galaxy needed me most." John stared at her in disbelief. The power of the ancients inside her. He had been right. She wasn't just a girl. She was a living weapon, an ancient force capable of changing the fate of the universe. But that power came at a cost. The galaxy had been waiting for her return. "Who is coming?" John asked, his voice trembling with the weight of the revelation. "And why are they after you?" Ilara's expression grew somber. "The ones who destroyed my people, the Barons, are part of a larger, darker force. They seek the power of the ancients to control the galaxy, to bend all life to their will. But they do not understand the price of such power. They believe they can control me, but they are wrong." John's mind raced. The Barons, the same beings who had sent the fleet after them, were only the beginning. Something far worse was looming on the horizon, something that even the Barons feared. But what was it? The alien fleet outside had not moved since Ilara's light had enveloped the ship, but John could sense that they were waiting, gathering their strength. The quiet between the two ships was a tense silence, as if an invisible battle was being fought on the edge of existence itself. They were at the precipice of something much bigger. "Ilara," John said, his voice filled with urgency, "what do we do now? We can't stay here. If they're afraid of you, they're going to come for us. And if they don't, something worse might." She nodded, her eyes narrowing with determination. "I know. The Barons are only the heralds of what is to come. They serve the eclipse, a force older than even the ancients. They seek to consume everything, to twist reality itself, and remake the universe in their image. But I will not let them. I will protect this galaxy. I will stop them." John's heart raced. An ancient, galaxy-consuming force. This was no longer about mere survival. This was about stopping an existential threat that had been hidden in the shadows for eons. And Ilara, the last of the ancients, was the only one who could stop it. "You're the key to stopping them?" John asked, his voice shaky but filled with a new sense of understanding. Ilara's gaze softened. "Yes, but the power I hold is not without consequences. To defeat the eclipse, I must tap into the full extent of the ancient power inside me, but doing so will destroy everything I have ever known. I will no longer be the person you see now." John shook his head. "We don't know if we can defeat them, Ilara. We don't even know how powerful they are." Ilara stepped closer to him, her eyes filled with a quiet strength. "The universe was never meant to be controlled. It was meant to be free. I will give everything to protect it, but I need your help. You must help me unlock the power of the ancients. Only together can we defeat them." John felt a surge of determination. He had been thrust into this fight without warning, but he couldn't back down now. He had a part to play in this. He had to. His role wasn't just to protect Ilara, but to help her unlock the secrets of the ancients and wield their power. But first, they had to survive the Baron's fleet, and the coming darkness that had already begun to move. The silence in the ship was broken by a low, rumbling noise. The alien fleet was moving again. The battle had begun. The chase begins. The sound of the rumbling grew louder as the alien fleet made its move. Outside, the once still ships of the Barons began to shift, their engines roaring to life as they positioned themselves for attack. John's breath caught in his throat. They were moving in, and he had no illusions now. This wasn't just a simple skirmish. They weren't just after Ilara. They were hunting her. "Ilara," John said, his voice tight. "We have to go. Now." Her violet eyes locked with his, and for a moment, the weight of their situation hung in the air like a thick fog. The silence between them was intense, filled with the understanding that the galaxy was on the brink of something unimaginable. But Ilara didn't flinch, didn't show any sign of fear. She was calm, resolute, as though the coming chaos was something she had known would happen all along. "You're right," she replied, her voice steady. "But escaping them won't be enough. The Barons will never stop. If we run, they will chase us to the ends of the universe. We must do more than flee. We must fight." John looked at the approaching fleet, a sense of dread creeping over him. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't trained for battle. His life had been spent in the quiet, analytical world of science and research. But now, standing beside Ilara, the fate of the galaxy rested on their shoulders. He had to find a way to help her, to survive this. "Fight," John echoed, his voice uncertain. "How do you fight them? They have the firepower of entire fleets at their command. How can we even stand a chance?" Ilara's gaze hardened. "The Barons have power, but they are blind. They have sought to control the forces of the universe, but they do not understand its true nature. I do. The time has come for me to awaken what I am, what I was meant to be." A pulse of energy shot through the ship, and John felt the entire vessel shudder under the weight of it. The walls hummed with an unfamiliar resonance, and for a brief moment, the stars outside seemed to blur, bending and stretching like elastic. Ilara stood tall, her body radiating with power, the glow of her skin now a brilliant hue that pulsed in rhythm with the ship's movements. John watched in awe as Ilara reached out with her hand, and the space around them seemed to warp. A holographic map of the galaxy flickered to life in the air, showing the position of the Barons' fleet and their surrounding forces. It was a complex web of ships, each one more powerful than anything he had ever seen. The fleet was closing in fast, and their tactics were far more advanced than anything humanity could muster. But Ilara wasn't concerned by the overwhelming force. She wasn't afraid. "They have not understood the balance," she said softly, her voice almost distant, as if she were speaking to herself. "They think they control the stars, but they do not. The power they seek lies not in their weapons, but in the natural order of the universe." She turned toward John, her eyes locking with his. "I can use their own power against them, but you must trust me completely. You must let go of the fear that holds you back." John nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't understand everything she had said, but he trusted her now. He didn't know if they would survive, but he couldn't let fear control him any longer. The stakes were too high. Ilara raised her hand, and the energy around them surged. The ship's controls flickered, and John felt the Explorer lurch forward, its engines roaring to life, as though it were propelled by some unseen force. The ship shot into the void, its speed accelerating far beyond its normal limits. The Barons' fleet, still in pursuit, had no idea what was coming. John gripped the control panel as the ship rocketed through space, dodging incoming fire from the alien fleet. The enemy ships were fast, their weaponry precise and devastating. Yet with each passing second, the Explorer seemed to anticipate their moves, twisting and turning in ways that seemed impossible. It was as if the very fabric of space was bending around them, distorting their enemies' attacks. "Ilara," John shouted, his voice tinged with disbelief. "What are you doing? How are we moving like this?" Her face was calm, her eyes glowing with the energy she was channeling. "I am bending the gravitational fields around us," she explained. "I can manipulate the very space we travel through. But I cannot do this for long. I need your help, John." John's mind raced. Help? What could he do? He was just a scientist. He didn't have the power Ilara wielded, but he could see now that her powers weren't enough to keep them safe forever. The Barons would adapt. They always did. "How can I help?" he asked, his voice tight. Ilara turned toward him, a slight smile touching her lips. "There is a weapon," A secret hidden within this ship, a weapon you must activate. It was never meant for anyone to use, but it is the only way we can defeat them. You must unlock it." John's eyes widened. A secret weapon, hidden in the Explorer. Where? He demanded, his pulse quickening. "In the core of the ship," Ilara replied. "It is powered by the same energy that I now control. But to unlock it, you must be willing to trust yourself as much as you trust me." John didn't hesitate. He stood up, his legs unsteady but determined, and rushed toward the ship's central control room. His mind was racing with questions, but he pushed them aside. He didn't have time to think. His hands flew over the controls, searching for the hidden activation sequence. Ilara's power was guiding him, directing his every move, and within moments, he found it. A small panel slid open, revealing a set of ancient-looking controls, covered in alien symbols that seemed to glow faintly. John's fingers trembled as he pressed the activation button. The ship's entire structure shuddered as the core came to life. Energy surged through the ship, flowing into every system, every circuit. The Explorer hummed with power, the walls vibrating as if they, too, were awakening. Outside, the Baron's fleet continued to chase them. But now, John could sense a shift in the air. The balance of power had changed. The Barons, with all their strength, were no longer in control. "Ilara," John shouted, his voice filled with awe. "It's working. This ship is." But before he could finish, the first of the Baron's ships fired a massive energy blast directly at them. The shot was enormous, capable of tearing apart entire fleets. John braced himself for the impact, but instead of shattering them, the blast simply disappeared, vanished into nothingness. John turned to Ilara, his eyes wide. "What did you do?" She smiled, her eyes glowing brighter than ever. "I have unlocked the power of the ancients. Now we fight back." And just like that, the battle was no longer just about survival. It was about victory. The final decision. The energy coursing through the Explorer was nothing short of awe-inspiring. The ship felt alive, humming with the power of the ancients that Ilara had unleashed. The very fabric of space around them seemed to bend and pulse in time with her will. As the Baron ships closed in, readying their weapons for another strike, John couldn't help but feel a sense of urgency. Their enemies were relentless, and yet something in him knew that the next moments would define everything. The fleet of Barons was no longer a threat they could simply evade. The battle had reached a tipping point, and Ilara, with her control over space and energy, was their only hope of surviving. But as the Explorer sped toward them, twisting through space with Ilara's guidance, John felt a deepening sense of unease. The weapon hidden within the ship was now fully activated, but it wasn't just the ship's strength that mattered. John understood now that the power was tied to Ilara's very essence, the energy that flowed through her veins, the last remnant of her people's legacy. It was a force capable of changing the very structure of the galaxy, but wielding it came at a cost Ilara had not yet fully explained. "John," Ilara's voice broke through his thoughts, calm but resolute. "What you are about to witness will be the end of this conflict, but it will also mark the end of everything we know." John looked at her, his heart pounding. "What do you mean, the end of everything we know? What will happen to you?" She looked at him, her violet eyes reflecting the weight of what was about to unfold. "To activate the full extent of the ancient power, I must become one with it. There is no returning from this, John. I will cease to be who I am. The energy I must channel is too great, and I will merge with it fully." John's breath caught. She would sacrifice herself. He had known, on some level, that the power she wielded came with a cost. But hearing it so plainly was another matter entirely. Ilara wasn't just fighting for her own survival, or even the survival of the galaxy. She was ready to give up everything, her very identity, to defeat the Barons and the looming threat of the eclipse. "We don't have to do this," John said, his voice desperate. "There has to be another way. You don't have to sacrifice yourself for this. Ilara placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch warm but filled with an ancient sadness. "This is the only way, John. I am the last of my kind. My people knew that the power of the ancients could be used for creation or destruction, and if the barons win, they will remake the universe in their image, one of control, of darkness. I will not let that happen." The explorers shuddered as the barons' fleet closed in on them. Their weapons were aimed at the ship, the shields barely holding against the incoming fire. There was no time to argue, no time to think. John knew that Ilara was right. The galaxy's fate lay in her hands. She turned back to the controls, her fingers dancing across the glowing interface as she channeled the full force of the ancient power. The ship's energy surged, spiraling into her body as her skin shimmered brighter and brighter. The space around them seemed to stretch and bend, warping with the power of her mind. John felt the temperature drop as the fabric of space began to tear. For a moment, he thought the ship might collapse under the weight of the energy. But Ilara held it together, steadying the ship as the Baron ships opened fire, their beams of energy now aimed directly at the explorer. He knew that their assault would come in waves, each blast stronger than the last. "This is it," Ilara said, her voice filled with quiet strength. "When I give the signal, you must activate the final sequence. It will be the last thing I do." John's heart sank. There was no turning back now, but he couldn't let fear take hold. He could only trust Ilara and do as she had asked. This wasn't just her fight, it was theirs. "Understood," he said, his voice steady, despite the storm of emotions racing through him. In the distance, the Baron ships launched their first barrage. Beams of raw energy cut through space, aimed straight at them. The explorer shook violently, the shields barely holding. Ilara's body glowed brighter, the energy radiating from her like a second sun.